Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Kathryn Garforth from Garforth Education, and this is the Right to Read initiative, something that came about after the Ontario Human Rights Commission launched or released its Right to Read public inquiry and came up with 157 recommendations on how we can make sure that our students get access to learning how to read the first time they are taught. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Kathryn Cook, who is a teacher librarian in 100 Mile House, or just outside of 100 Mile House. And we're going to talk to her about her journey to the science of reading or structured literacy. Good day, Kathryn. How are you?
I'm very good today. Thank you, Kathryn.
Wonderful. Sorry about that little.
That's okay.
No. Why don't you give everyone a little bit of a background about who you are and what you've done, your training and your journey?
Okay. So I am the daughter of two teachers and the granddaughter of a teacher and the sister of my sister has autism. And this gives me a slightly different starting point of going into education in that I really didn't know that I had a choice. I decided to go into art education and did a degree in a double art major at UBC with a minor or concentration in English as a second language. And I graduated from there in 1982. So this is actually my 40th year as an educator. During those years, I have taught many different grades and many different subjects. Everything from high school down through the intermediate grades and into primary. And in 1990, I decided to get my library diploma. And so I went back to UBC while my youngest son was 2 and got a library diploma. And then we moved into basically the middle of nowhere, Bridge Lake, which is a lovely place, but it's 35 minutes from any major town. And proceeded to have another child and did a lot of TOC during that time and ended up with a job at a small school, a very small school, 10 minutes away from home with 3 classrooms in it. And so one of the jobs that I was given was to teach phonics through a holistic phonics program to our younger grades as the prep teacher. And McCracken phonics starts with, can you hear the sound at the beginning of the word? Can you hear the sound at the end of the word? After 5 consonants, we're going to teach you a vowel, and it's all done on little chalkboards. They have to read the words back. And that was a great way for me, who really didn't have any training in how to teach everyone to read, to see how we could deliver something systematically in a classroom. It looked like the grade 1 teacher, who was a reading recovery teacher, was going to retire the following year. So I volunteered to take the reading recovery training because in my past positions as a learning support teacher at a high school, I realized that I did not have the skills to do that. So I took reading recovery training and was surprised to find in a way that we didn't do that systematic instruction. We were given books to use that were patterned. We were told that, yes, we did need to teach those letter to sound connections, but not in any systematic way. What we wanted to do was to get them to start reading right away. So, and so I did that for a year, trying to teach these children how to read by using the leveled readers and taking copious notes and teaching them how to write a story, and keeping track of lots of paperwork and seeing how they were doing. And I did my very best, but in that first year, I wasn't able to bring the children too far. In the second year, our school reduced to 2 people. And so I lost my position there, but they couldn't find somebody to do reading recovery. So what I ended up doing was teaching reading recovery in the morning for an hour and driving 60 kilometers to 100 Mile House to teach grade 1, 2 in the afternoon, which was a little stressful to say the very least. But at least I was able to get my second year of reading recovery in. And so I began this long career of trying to teach children how to read using leveled readers. But knowing what I had known about using this explicit phonics instruction, I always tried to include that. And so when we finally moved away from that about 9 years ago to 150 Mile, which is just outside of Williams Lake, I continued my journey. I joined the after school book club, but this is a district heavily based in reading recovery. And when I'd first started this journey, we didn't even have internet at my house. We didn't even have cell phone service. And so getting any kind of professional development that was further away than the district was quite difficult. And we were more interested in other things. I ramble, but at the new school, there was another teacher already teaching reading recovery, and I ended up moving into this grade 1 or grade 2 position and still trying to teach. And I used a program called Words Their Way with a McCracken approach, where I would try to give them those letter sounds so that they would hear a word, they could break it apart and write it down, then they could sound out a word. But then I would go to these leveled books to try to teach them to read. And unless they had a good grasp of some of that knowledge, it was really hard to accelerate them. And if they were at all anxious about guessing, it would stop them in their tracks. And so I did this for a number of years, and I had differentiated instruction. So I had 5 reading groups, I had 5 spelling groups almost, and 5 writing groups, because they were never all at the same level. But that meant that there really wasn't time for anything else except all those little groups of readers and writers. And nothing matched up. So, and then COVID came along, and that just made things worse, because now I'm getting in my classroom children who actually have never been to school before. They stayed home for kindergarten. So they've just started coming in school in grade 1. But even those that, came to me last year in grade 1, they'd missed the bulk of, the whole spring of learning to read, where we can really get some acceleration happening. The kindergarten kids came with almost no letter sound knowledge. So I had to go lower and lower in trying to, help them with those foundational skills so that they could learn to read. But again, I'm trying to teach them letter sounds on the one hand, and then I'm putting them in a book that they don't know the code for. And so they have to remember the pattern. And of course, you cannot be expected to decode the word dinosaur right at the beginning. But you can look at a picture of a dinosaur and say, oh, that's a dinosaur. Or there's the horse pony thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you really have to look at that, at least that first letter. So it has been frustrating for me, had been frustrating for quite a few years, trying to figure out how to juggle this and to get them to actually read, especially when they come in with speech impediments as well. You know, there's a lot of things that need to go into taking them from where they are to give them enough language so that they can even predict what is in those early readers. And so it was just over a year ago, I attended a workshop through our school psychologist. And she showed us these videos, Stanislaw Dehaene, How Reading Works in the Brain. And one of Lynn Stone's things saying, what is MSV? And that started me on this dive.
Yeah.
But also we'd had a set of flyleaf books in the school to just to bring the children who weren't learning that way, to start them systematically going through the letters and reading with more complicated text. Well, that deep dive led to some very interesting conversations with my principal, who I managed to sweet talk into buying us more of the flyleaf books and the guides. So there's a foundation guide and there's a closed guide. And so I dove into those throughout. I can only do this because I've been teaching too many different things for a long time. I threw out my entire program and dove into trying to teach using the flyleaf. But the flyleaf was wonderful because I tried to assess where they were. They didn't have a really good assessment, but I could get an idea with my 1-2s about where they were. And so it was, the books are decodable. That means you can't guess. And it was really apparent who had been guessing all along and who was actually scanning through the words.
Mm-hmm.
But I was really desperate for those because I had, children who are not being taught to read in a way that helps them to learn, experience trauma. And I had a young fellow in my classroom who was totally traumatized by trying to guess. Every letter sound I had taught him using my McCracken program. I had a low group where I did that systematic phonics with the little whiteboards every day, writing the words, reading them back. And what I realized is that my low group using that passed my second to lowest group using the words their way. So what was the most effective? The McCracken. Just that systematic phonics. And then when I was able to teach the books where he had a limited code and he could look at a word and know what it was, that young man started to read. And suddenly he wasn't anywhere near as anxious to come to school. Because I remember after spring break, trying to give him a leveled book and saying, here, I taught this to you 2 weeks ago. Can you read it for me? And he couldn't because he didn't know what all the letters were. He couldn't remember the pattern. He knew that he wasn't able to read. But once he got into those decodable books where it made sense, where he knew he could be right, where he could sound out those words, and he knew what the flash or heart words were, he really began to make progress and has zoomed ever since because he's learned, I have a strategy for reading in these texts, and I can go from here. And this was a young fellow who used to not even want to go to kindergarten. He would cry outside the classroom because he didn't want to come in, because you don't want to come in if you can't do what the other kids are doing.
Of course. Of course. And I know, like, I've looked at the various websites on prices on these programs, and for decodable text, Flyleaf is pretty pricey, especially for class sets. But the thing to remember is just one student for 1 year in reading recovery costs more.
Yes. Yes. So I experimented with this. I only had 3 months with the children, and I had split them into groups because I had grade 2s and grade 1s. I had strong grade 1s and weak grade 2s who were reading at the same level. I had very strong grade 2s and some very weak grade 1s. And so I played with doing the small groups and doing word chains, cut up sentences, all the things that come with the program to help, because I didn't know what it was supposed to look like. And this is my other problem, is how are we supposed to know what it looks like unless we have something to guide us? And I don't think it's fair that we should be planning out of the internet and the atmosphere what we should be doing every day. It's enough for me to learn how to administer this in a really good, solid way so that all the kids learn to read. I shouldn't have to make it up on my own. I've had to make up, things like these fluency sentences. So now we fast forward to this year. And because I was just teaching a straight grade 1, I've been able to start everybody at the same book. So we start, and in the first book, we're learning about punctuation, question marks, we're sounding out words, we're learning a couple of heart words, and then we build on that. And every child in my classroom is learning to read and write and spell. Some better than others, of course, but they're all really invested in reading. I've created this lovely reading culture in my classroom, and the kids are so proud that they can read. And so with the Flyleaf, that's sort of my whole class program. But I've been able to collect some other types of decodable books. Thank you, Principal. So that we are able, once they get enough code, then we can move into things like these phonic books. And I also bought some for older students. So they're kind of like a high-low book, which if I'd had when I was teaching learning support in Clinton, high school learning support grade levels of reading that went from like grade 2 to grade 10, I would have just loved to have had a resource like this where I could, because it's cumulative. You learn some sounds, it's sat pin and then moves on. So you can put them in a series that the kids love because the pictures are fun. And so this can be extra reading for my kids. And
you take a minute to just define 2 terms that you've been speaking about that I want to make sure everybody understands. One is heart words, and the other is high-low when you're talking about reading books.
Okay, let's start with heart words. In the past, and I've seen this where kids will have to learn like 100 sight words, and they're not, and it's words like the and sorry, well now I have to look. So the and said and maybe yes, but there's like those high frequency words that they have to learn, but they're not taught to sound them out. They're supposed to memorize them. And what a heart word is that, okay, so let me give you an example. In the very first book of Flyleaf, the heart word that we needed to know, or a tricky word, was yes. The first three letters that we learn are S, A, and M. So we're going to look at that word yes. What do you see that you recognize and can decode? Well, we don't know the Y yet. We don't know the E, but we know that S at the end. So what are the parts that we have to remember or put a heart above? Is the Y and the E. Did that make sense? That's what we have to remember. And if the word was said, for example, I just want to do the teacher thing and put it on the board.
Oh, go for it.
Okay. So can you see me if I do this?
Yeah.
Okay. So if we take a word like said, and we've learned S and we've learned D, then we know that this word starts with S and ends with D. But AI doesn't usually say eh. So this is the part that we need to remember. So we can decode most of those sight words or high frequency words just by looking at the parts that we can decode and then remembering the parts that we don't know the code for yet. And we call them, so I call them heart words because there's pieces of them that they have to remember. Okay, the other term was high-low books. I'll be right back.
Sure. And for those of you who are watching or listening, there is lots of information available online about heart words, and there's even some great videos that go into descriptions that you can actually use in your classroom, describing the heart words and how to read.
Really, isn't it really great reading?
Yes.
And they have these lovely little videos that I play when it's truly something that can't be decoded. Mm-hmm. Sorry. So a high-low book is a book that is designed for children who don't have a lot of code knowledge, but they're older, so they don't want to read about Jim and Jam. They would like to read The Big Hill or Ned is Bad, because that's going to appeal to a child who is 8, 9, 10. But the words in the book are we're still learning the code. We've got this naughty cat, Ned, and he likes to get into trouble. So for our older readers, we want things that are easier to read, but don't look like baby books. And these are the only ones I have in my classroom, but there are some really fun ones in this Phonic book series that, like the Talisman, and really things that will draw those kids in. And so they're a better choice for using with those older students.
Yeah, they're sometimes referred to as high interest, low vocabulary.
Exactly. And that's what I would have liked to have had 30, 40 years ago when I was teaching those high school kids in the middle of nowhere. But at least something like this, high interest, low vocabulary. And then there's a whole series that goes with them where we're adding a little bit of code each time, and then they get to practice putting that code into use.
And that's the way we need to do it, so that everyone is able to come out with the skills that they need to be successful readers. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you seem to be doing a great job now. And I mean, not that you weren't trying your best before, but with the knowledge that you had, you couldn't do better. And, luckily you had that professional development put on the school psychologist that said, this is something else. And this is going to just make it so you can reach more of your students the first time around. And I think that it can be threatening or unwanted with some of the more veteran teachers when they're like, you know what, I'm nearing the end of my career. Let's just keep it comfortable.
Yes.
Or, the ones that have been, I've been doing this for decades. I've got kids reading. Why should I have to change?
But then there's always this argument. Oh, there's always some that are not going to learn to read. There's always some who won't get it. And, that's a huge injustice, because it should be every child's right to learn to read. And we need to use best practices to get them there. And I could have, I'm 1 year away from when I can retire, but I wasn't willing to let this slide by. I couldn't see any more children leaving my class without reading, because it follows them. You see what happens to them. They feel badly about themselves. Lots of them, actually, the statistics show it's a pipeline to prison because they don't finish school. They feel terrible about themselves. They don't have any way to lift themselves out of what, if they're poverty stricken, they haven't a way to get out of poverty. They can't even go on to trade school or to get a really good job. They can't even fill in an application for a job. And that shouldn't happen in this day and age when we have practices or resources that can actually help those children to read. With this type of a program, 95% of our children should be able to read. Using balanced literacy practices or reading recovery practices left 20% almost of our kids unable to read. And it just used to break my heart every year when I would have a couple of those kids that left my classroom without being able to get there.
Well, and several of the teachers that I know that I've spoken to about this say it's really rejuvenized them and give them that excitement back to their teaching, because they're like, wow, like this little change here and little change there is really making a difference for more of my students. And I don't think there's a teacher that doesn't get excited when they see that little light bulb go off and the kids are like, I finally get it.
Yes. And there are lots of courses that we could take and have Pro-D funds paid for. And our school psychologist did recommend one, and I may end up taking that before the end, but at least I'd had that phonics practice so that when I already know how to teach, what does it sound like or feel like in your mouth? Is your voice box on or is it off? But I think for a lot of new teachers, they would really need lots of guidance and support and materials so that they would be able to do that easily, not easily.
Mm-hmm.
So
definitely. The other thing to mention is that, in a more rural school district, you don't have the same resources. Like I'm in an urban center, and within the neighborhood, there's probably 5 or 6 different tutoring centers. So parents have the option to do after school tutoring programs for their children if they can afford it. And they can get that one-on-one support so they can learn the code and get the phonics that they need. But in the rural setting, they're not going to be the same resources available and necessarily the families that can afford it, because these programs aren't cheap.
No, they're not cheap. And I know that there are tutors working in our community, and and that's great, but not everybody can afford one. when I think about even tutoring, going to tutor in retirement, I don't even know that I would want to charge money, because I really feel that children should have the right to read. But anyway, but there aren't very many places where they can go here to get that phonics
Foundation.
education.
Definitely. Well, that's wonderful in what you're doing. Can you show us some of your favorites that you have in your classroom?
Some of my favorite what?
Resources, tools, strategies.
Okay.
Like I see those cards that are on your board. What are those, and where are they from?
So these are from Tools for Reading, and Tools for Reading is developed by one of the past teachers of letters, and I'm sorry, I can't remember her name right now, but these are very carefully crafted to be accurate. Lots of your alphabets. They would use the picture of an umbrella, and this changes the sound of the vowel. So for example, this is up, and so the in the U is very very distinct. It's not nasalized by the that comes after it. Now, the other thing about these cards that is a little different is we are going from the sound to the print. And so in some places they say, lock these up and don't show them. But I want my kids to be aware that there's more than one way to say f or spell f. And so we've already started learning that usually when f is at the end of, after a short vowel, it's doubled. F for phone is another way that we can say that. So when we're learning a new sound or letter, I always bring these cards out. Now I also have, sorry, gonna do this to you. Don't get seasick. Up on top there is 1/2 of my vowel valley. And so this is kids' lips. And because I'm trying to get the kids to figure out what their mouths are doing when they're creating a sound, I have created a vowel valley in my room so I can go around and say, okay, we're doing this letter, and this is what your mouth is supposed to be doing. I also have some mirrors, but I do it, usually it's more, I say the sound, everybody try to say the sound. What do you notice? Is your voice box on or is it off? Can you plug your nose? They love that one.
Yeah.
Because if you try to do M with your nose plugged, nothing happens. And then on my opposite wall, I have all the consonants, and they're laid out as best as I could.
Well, the thing that I love about the card that you held up for the phoneme is that allows your higher level students that are having a fairly easy time with the code that you're currently teaching to see the other graphemes that can represent the phoneme. Exactly. And that allows for more of the incidental phonics teaching, where it's not part of the explicit program, but you're throwing those tidbits in to help the students that are ready for more.
And I do that in another way as well, because one of the nice things about the Flyleaf is they have companion books. So we've now gotten far enough in our series that we have 2 titles of different difficulties. So in the Emergence series, we have Jen's Best Gift Ever, and it has a limited code, and and story in it. But the same story is told in this. And this is the next series up. And so I've been able to give this copy of the book to my students who are further along, because everybody's going to learn to read at a different rate. But I do want to use these books. So Flyleaf has been really good. The Phonic Books has been really good.
Well, and that thing about having the two levels for the same story means that your students can still have conversations about the text, regardless of whether they're in the lower level book or the higher level book. The gist of the story is the same, and they can have those same takeaways and same conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And it allows a more of an inclusive environment. And one thing that I wanted to mention earlier that you brought up is the reading environment that you've created.
Mm-hmm.
And I know one criticism that you often hear about, structured literacy or science of reading is that you're not going to create a love for reading, and that kids are not going to want it in the classroom, and it's going to be hesitant and resistant. Now, this is what I've heard from some, the balanced literacy and the whole language approaches. But I have yet to find a teacher that does instruction following the science of reading or aligned with structured literacy who has found this. Kids are excited because they know that what they're doing is teaching them the skills they need to succeed. And as Dr. Anita Archer always says, that success breeds success. And they're more excited because they understand the code.
Exactly. I also have a little trick up my sleeve that I've been using for years. So I allow the children to pick we're all working on the one story, and they have access to that in one way or another. But then I let them pick. These are from CKLA, free online. So I've downloaded and put these into little books that they can choose to read. Now, the children are able to put a sticky note in that book, and partner reading is huge. This is the way that they can read their stories and listen to the language in the different books, and share that with other children. So on this sticky note, these are so Izzy has read, and this is a Dandelion Launcher number 6. And 6 people have listened to her read it. And then she hands the book back in. And when we go to buddy reading on Wednesdays with our grade 4 buddies, I task the grade 4 buddies with making sure that they are actually able to read these books, because they're reading so many books, I can't keep up. I can't listen to every child read every book that they're reading. And so I kind of went, how can I do this? And we came up with the buddies being responsible. And the buddies are quite interested because they really like to see the success of their little buddies being able to learn to read, and are quite surprised. So, and I keep track on a graph. And once they've finished either 5 homework pieces or 5 books, they get a prize from my infinite prize bin, which was donated by a local hair cutter who kept getting sent prizes for kids who got haircuts. Anyway, I got a big box. But I would go to the dollar store anytime and buy little things. And that's what I used to do. But it's just a motivation. And then that way I am keeping track of how much they're reading, because so they're reading, some are reading really difficult books, some are reading easier books, but they're all buying into, we're going to read to each other.
Well, and I think that's a genius way of having the big buddies, do something that's going to help you and help the kids, because it means your students can show off to their big buddy, get the support from an older student instead of you. And they still have the opportunity to have that shared reading time with their big buddy.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, so I mean, that has been a huge success, because I was really pulling my hair out trying to listen to all these kids read, and I just couldn't find, because I want to check in at the end to make sure that they are reading it correctly. But that's the books that are outside of my one book that we do lots of things with. The other thing I like about the flyleaf is that we really need to teach to comprehension. There's two sides of the reading rope. So I'm starting with decoding, but what the flyleaf gives me is lots of opportunities to talk about comprehension, vocabulary, writing, writing about the stories and learning what a sentence is, and explicit printing, you know, how to print letters. Not that I've gotten all of them to do them correctly, but I try. Now, where was I going with that? Sorry, lost my train of thought, but it covers everything. So this morning, we did a choral reading of this book, because they are online. I can put them on the TV that I have in my room, and I want them to get some fluency. So I'm going to read it, and then you're going to read it back with that expression, so that they get that practice. And then we're going to answer some questions. What's the setting of the story? And how do we find evidence for that? What does lid mean? And it's the lid on the gift box. How, you know, so we can really dive deep into what's going on in the story, asking questions, writing things about it. And cut up sentences are really fun. So sentences from the storybook, we put on little pieces of paper. Here I go again.
Well, I think it's on your board behind you as well.
Pardon me?
I think some of the stories on your flip chart behind you.
Yes. Well, so on the chart beside me, these are fluency passages. So in every new book, we get a new word or two that they haven't learned to decode yet, but we do need to practice reading them. So we make up a chart like this, and part of their early morning is they need to come in and read the chart to practice those words. And I've been sneaky about that too, because I was having a hard time keeping track of who was reading and who wasn't. So now I have some grade 1 monitors who get a turn to check off who has read all these sentences and the words that go with it. And I just put these on sentence strips. And this one, they're supposed to be able to, she picked up, there'll be a bunch of words that they can pick from, but I haven't had a chance to do that. Her cat. And I won't do any more. But there's some different activities that you can do with this. So this isn't the cut up sentences. So I got these little containers at the dollar store. And the sentences I have put on, each word is cut out. And this is actually a reading recovery technique where the child tells a story and then the teacher prints it onto cardstock. And then later on, the child has to put the words in order. So they have to learn to look for where's the capital letter. And so this one would be Jen cannot, and we're doing 2-syllable words, get him, which is the cat, because the cat's gone under the bed. And so they have to look. So they take this little container, they dump the words on the table, and they have to try to put them back in the right order. You can't do that if you're not comprehending what the text is about, what the sentence is about. So anybody that would be worried about the comprehension or coming from meaning, this kind of a program actually gives us so many tools to work with to make sure that we are making sure that the children comprehend. So I'll have them working on a worksheet, and then I'll have them come up and they have to do all the different sentences. I've got them in different colors and different containers. And now I can actually say, okay, you can take a sentence back to your desk, get out your journal, write the sentence. I want you to do 3 different sentences, pick the one you like to illustrate in your little book. But they can't do that illustration unless they understand what the sentence says. So I think that fear that phonics is only about decoding, we don't need to worry about that, because if you have a rich program like this, you're teaching to both sides of the reading rope. So the decoding side, the language comprehension, multiplied together equals reading comprehension.
Exactly.
But you can't have the reading comprehension unless you can lift the words off the page and have the vocabulary.
Well, and you even mentioned ways that you were working on vocabulary with your example of lid and the present.
Yes. And that's all in the flyleaf, which is expensive, but I just love using it. So I will talk again about, can I tell you one more reason?
Yeah, of course. I just wanted to bring up that while it is expensive, it's the same as having one of your students in your classroom in reading recovery for 1 year. But this program is going for all of your students this year and every other year after that.
Yes, absolutely. And as we get better at teaching it, we can bring our own expertise to it and feel more comfortable with it. Another program that I've been trying to use to develop listening comprehension is I've taken some of the units from the Core Knowledge Foundation. So up above here, you can see on the board, there's some pictures of different fables. So we've been working on fables, and you read a fable, and there's vocabulary words. We talk about the moral or the lesson, and then there's vocabulary words that come in up. They're not expected to read them, but I'm going to talk about them. So we had a really fun lesson that I would never have thought of doing on my own, because someone was trying to pretend that he was something he was not. And what ended up, so we did, let's pretend. Okay, everybody stand up. We're going to pretend to eat a bowl of cereal. Well, we're going to pretend to make a sandwich. We're going to pretend to be old. The kids had so much fun with that, because it allows them to learn the language, learn a new word, and to have some fun doing it. So really good ideas from a program that's absolutely free online. Mm-hmm. Lots of it is United States based, so it's not going to work here, but lots of it
is. It is and it isn't, because the alphabetic code is the same for Canadian English, yes, American English, British English, Australian English.
Yes,
it's still the same phonics program. And while there might be subtle differences when it comes to rhyming pronunciation, it is the same code, and it doesn't matter where you're getting your resources as long as they're following the principles.
Yes. So I've been having fun with that one as well. So.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me today, Kathryn. You've been a wealth of information, and I really am encouraged whenever I speak to a teacher who was reading recovery trained and has made that transition, because, as you've even talked about in this, there are some aspects of your reading and recovery that you have been able to transition or follow with you, but recognizing that there was that piece missing, that you weren't able to reach all of your students. So would you have any advice for a current reading recovery teacher to help just push them that much further, just give them that little nudge to say, well, maybe look a little bit more at this?
That's really difficult because the culture of reading recovery, I actually had a conversation with reading recovery teacher about a student that she was tutoring grade 4 or 5, and she said, well, as long as we don't use the simple view of reading to help him read, as long as we teach him more strategies, he will learn to read. That was the first time I had ever in this district heard of the simple view of reading. And I probably should have done a dive at that time, but I didn't know. And, this is a common theme. Teachers don't know. So what I would say to any reading recovery teacher is, we need to lift those words off the page. And using a predictable book takes their eyes away from the words. They are not able to orthographically map those words because they're looking at the pictures, they're making a guess from the first letter. And so wouldn't it be more beneficial to everybody if you really explicitly taught those letter sound connections to reading and writing and spelling, and systematically brought them through an intervention instead of roaming around the known to find out what they do know? You do an observation survey where you find out how many words they can read, identify single, there's a huge list of tests. And really think about, if you were teaching systematically and building their confidence, you might get a lot farther. The research is clear. The research is clear about what we need to know. And I recently had a little bit of an argument on Twitter, because I lived there, with a reading recovery teacher who said, oh, those early books, they've been selected for interest and whatever. But basically, those beginning books are pattern books. They have not learned that code. And the teacher needs to sit there right beside them to prompt them correctly. There's a whole page, like 50 or 60 prompts that they teach you in reading recovery to get the child to guess the word. I say, guess. And she says, but we do teach orthographic mapping. And I think the final comment was, you cannot expect a child who has no letter sound knowledge or very minimal to decode any of those A, B, or C level books, because they use code that is far beyond where their ability to read is. So from a reading recovery trained teacher, balanced literacy for at least 15 years, please, please, please look into the research and let go of your psycholinguistic guessing game that came from Ken Goodman, who believed this theory until the day he dies. And I just find it frustrating, because once I went down this path, all these things made sense why I was struggling with resources, why the kids weren't learning to read, why they would get stuck in level D forever, because they hadn't been taught to read through the words so that they couldn't orthographically map them. So I don't know. All I can say is, please think about your practices, and instead of doing what you think is the best for you, do what is best for the child, because too many children do not learn to read using reading recovery and the methods in balanced literacy. Every single one of my kids is reading this year. And I'm making darn sure that they will all read when they're leaving my classroom, but they're not going to flounder at level D, because they just don't have the skills to decode the words. Sorry, that was long-winded and passionate, but
it came from the heart, and it's true. And that's what we need to get out and hear. And thank you so much. So this is going to be available as a replay at the Right to Read Initiative.com, on the Right to Read Initiative YouTube channel, and available as a podcast episode sometime next week. If you look to the notes in the description about it, you will see links to the different materials that Kathryn brought up during our conversation. Thank you for joining us, everyone, and have a good day.